So let's talk a little bit about the agenda behind Hollywood.
Like Contagion, for example. I mean, you can work with a writer, a team of writers. It could be done through any number of these foundations or whatever, that they're saying, hey, we want to run a scenario, and we want to run a scenario for this, this outbreak of a deadly virus. And everyone's walking around with masks, right? And they're all like horrified of each other. They're all staying away because if you get this thing, there's like what, 1 in 4 or half of the 25 to 50% die. I mean, it was insane. It was like completely irrational as far as the actual scenario, but it put in place this idea that the only way to stop it was a vaccine. They were trying to find the origin, like the first monkey, right? Kind of like in the outbreak, right? They're trying to find the origin, and then eventually they give up on that. And then somehow they still they solve it with the vaccine, and everyone gets vaccinated, and they're all good, and everyone can go back to life. It's the same story, right? Now that's clearly a propaganda piece.
Hey, leuk dat je kijkt en of luistert naar Vibestalk. We hopen je met deze show te kunnen inspireren, je wereld eens bewuster kunnen maken, vooral een positief oplatingstation te zijn in deze zeer bijzondere tijden. Vind jij nou te gek wat wij doen? Join dan de Univibes Family. Zo krijg je exclusief toegang tot onze eigen app. Ga daarvoor naar onze website www.univibes.nl/community of laat een donatie achter, want alleen met jouw steun, met jouw hulp, bouwen wij aan nieuwe media en zo aan een mooiere wereld. Doen. Dankjewel. En hij zit terug bij ons op de bank. En ben ik weer blij dat je bij ons bent. Vriend van de show, Baptiste de Paap. Welkom. Wij gaan weer een fantastische show tegemoet. Vibestalk Global. We gaan zo meteen weer een Zoom call maken met Amerika. Ja. Sean Stone, vanavond de gast. Zoon van de filmregisseur Oliver Stone. Die ook vaak regelmatig te gast is geweest bij bijvoorbeeld Joe Rogan. Yes. Waar ga je het vanavond met Sean Stone over hebben? Want hij is natuurlijk echt opgegroeid in het Hollywoodse, zeg maar. Ja, dus eerst en vooral zijn vader Oliver Stone is net zo groot als Steven Spielberg. Hè. Dat is een van de grootste regisseurs van Hollywood. De Wall Street films met Michael Douglas, Platoon, de film over The Doors met Val Kilmer. JFK? JFK met Kevin Costner. Dus heel veel grote Hollywood films, ook Snowden. Hè. De film Snowden vind ik ook een hele goede film. Hè, want dat gaat over iemand die voor de NSA werkt. Dat is een beetje vergelijkbaar met de CIA. En naar buiten komt en vertelt van, luister, we worden in de gaten gehouden. Onze smartphones, onze laptops, onze computers houden ons in de gaten. Dat wordt allemaal geregistreerd en verzameld. Nou, die man Snowden die dat als klokkenluider naar buiten heeft gebracht, die mag nooit meer Amerika in. Anders zit hij voor zijn hele leven opgesloten. Maar Sean Stone is dus de zoon van Oliver Stone en groeit op in een Hollywood-familie. Een van de meest invloedrijke Hollywood-families, kan je zeggen. En hij is als kind al kindacteur in de films van papa. Hij staat op 7-jarige leeftijd samen met Kevin Costner in de film JFK. En hij groeit daarin op. En hij krijgt natuurlijk een ander soort opvoeding dan de meesten. Ja, en er is natuurlijk heel veel om te doen om Hollywood. Ja. Kun je daar misschien kort iets over vertellen? Ja, nee, hij ziet wat eigenlijk de krachten zijn achter Hollywood. Hè. We weten dat Hollywood voor een groot deel gefinancierd wordt door de deep state. Dat Hollywood gebruikt wordt voor predictive programming. Dat Hollywood gebruikt wordt voor mind control. Dat Hollywood gebruikt wordt om bepaalde geloofssystemen naar het publiek te brengen. En hij groeit op in die wereld. En zijn vader, heel interessant, is juist iemand die heel kritisch is op de overheid, de establishment. Snowden is zo'n film, JFK ook. Die proberen juist een ander verhaal te geven dan wat, zeg maar, het mainstream verhaal is wat door de media gegeven wordt. Dus hij wordt eigenlijk van jongs af aan wel aangemoedigd om zelfstandig en kritisch te denken. Zijn vader is een truthseeker, dus iemand die naar waarheid zoekt. En dat is hij zelf ook. Aan de andere kant is hij natuurlijk ook wel iemand die niet... hij is ook wel een beetje een diplomaat, denk ik. Hè? Dus iemand die niet meteen per se het achterste puntje van zijn tong wil laten zien. Maar hij heeft het wel heel mooi allemaal samengebracht in zijn werk. Hij heeft heel veel documentaires gemaakt. Hij is zelf ook acteur. Maar in zijn documentaires laat hij wel, vind ik, het achterste van zijn tong zien. Want een van zijn beste documentaires is The Best Kept Secret. Dus in het Nederlands het best bewaarde geheim. En daarin gaat hij echt in op de donkere kant van
Hollywood, op de donkere kant van zeg maar de deep state of de elite. En dan heb ik het dus over de relatie tussen politiek en pedofilie, maar ook de relatie tussen de elite en de satanistische rituelen. Maar dat zie je echt in zijn films. Ik heb de series gezien, The Best Kept Secret. Ja, dat is geen feel good. Dat is echt wel, om het zo maar te zeggen, dark stuff. En we gaan met hem praten. En we gaan kijken hoe hij het ziet. We gaan kijken hoe hij het beleefd heeft. We gaan praten over zijn jeugd. We gaan praten over hoe is het dan om als 7-jarige op die set te staan. En hoe creëert dat jouw wereldbeeld.
Ja.
Ja.
Ik ben ontzettend benieuwd, Baptiste. Ik zit nu al op het puntje van mijn stoel. Dus laten we gauw gaan naar het interview met Baptiste de Paap en Sean Stone. Ik wens je heel veel plezier. Let's go.
Hi Sean, it's so good to see you. How have you been?
Doing well, thank you.
Sean, you are a filmmaker, you are a media host, you're an author, an actor, and above all, you are a truth seeker and spiritual activist. But you are also the son of Hollywood legend and one of the greatest directors of our time, Oliver Stone. He directed blockbuster movies like Wall Street and Wall Street Money Never Sleeps, with Michael Douglas and Charlie Sheen, Platoon, The Doors, Alexander with Colin Farrell, Nixon, JFK and Snowden. And in a lot of the movies that your father directed, the protagonist is looking for the truth. And in order to do that, he has to take the red pill. What does the concept of taking the red pill, what does that mean?
What is taking the red pill? What does it mean to you?
Well, because
the Matrix, I think.
Yeah, it is.
The Matrix. Introduced that from the Alice in Wonderland, right?
Yes.
Concept.
It is at one point in the Matrix, Neo is offered two pills: the red pill and, of course, the blue pill. And the blue pill keeps him in his normal reality, and the red pill is taking him to a different reality that is maybe not so comfortable, but is a real reality, we could say. In your series, The Best Kept Secret, you also refer to it as a red pill journey. So that's why I want to take our viewers into this concept of the red pill. So how would you describe it, taking the red pill?
I take the purple pill because I like to operate in both realities. But the red pill is, it certainly is a concept of awakening. As I mentioned, it goes back, I think Alice in Wonderland had, I guess it was the two pills, one that makes you taller and one that makes you small, wasn't it?
Yes.
In a sense, it's like, are we going to expand our awareness? Are we going to grow into a more awakened being, which is to say, expanding consciousness, being willing to see through the system, through the matrix that is a reality that's been designed for us, right? These systems of control, be it through the financial institutions, the legal institutions, the whole corporate matrix, and how much we operate on assumptions as opposed to really understanding our reality or who we are. So as we take the red pill, we try to grow and understand the corruption of our societies, of the conspiracies of our societies. At the same time, we try to understand ourselves on the spiritual side of things. If we are only looking outside, externally, we're missing the fact that this is a journey of self-discovery. It's about learning who we are and why these things are coming into our consciousness, right? As we grow and expand and become more aware, we want to hopefully evolve into becoming more compassionate, considerate, empathetic, understanding beings.
Sean, let's talk a little bit about you and your journey. And I would like to start with the movie JFK. The movie JFK is a part of your childhood. It's an American epic political thriller, and the film examines the investigation into the assassination of John F. Kennedy by New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison, who came to believe there was a conspiracy to assassinate John F. Kennedy, and that Lee Harvey Oswald did not act alone. And in the movie you play the son Jasper of Jim Garrison, who is portrayed, of course, by Kevin Costner. You were 7 years old at the time. Was that one of your red pill moments?
It must have been a red pill moment. I remember being on the set, you know, six, I don't remember, 6, 7, 6 maybe, I can't remember, 6 or 7. And, you know, it was an amazing experience of, first of all, I remember the process of my dad studying the case, watching documentaries, and I you know, the line I think that I spoke in the film was my original idea when Mada was telling me about, you know, this research into who really killed Kennedy. I was like, well, if the people that killed him, what if they were going to kill us? You know, there was a fear of that. If they're so powerful to kill the president, why can't they kill us or you? Or, and you know, it was an awakening to the reality of power. I think it started, you could even say, like, you know, power, my realization of society and the world out there, it was always there in me because I'd been on film sets in, you know, 6 months, from 6 months old in Salvador, I'm sorry, in the film Salvador, which was shot in Mexico, you know, 2 years old in the Philippines on Platoon, and then all these different, you know, Wall Street and Dallas, and back to the Philippines for Born on the 4th of July, and seeing the, you know, the world outside of LA, outside of my home. I think it was kind of fluid to me, so I had an understanding a little bit of a big world, but the notion of power, you know, politics, it was already coming into my consciousness even before JFK, because of the first Iraq War. That was, you know, when I was like 4 or 5 years old, and Bush was talking about, you know, Saddam being this new Hitler, and Saddam looked like a, you know, a real scary figure, right, on TV, the way that they portrayed him. And so, you know, I'm sure he was in many ways, you know, a scary figure for people. But the point was that we created this conception of we have to go to war and overthrow this guy, and we're the good guys. But you know, these were all awakening moments, right, in consciousness. I was aware of what was going on. We were talking about, you know, the bombings, the missiles being launched. I asked even during the Iraq War, I'm like, well, what if what if Iraq launches missiles at us? You know, what if they're going to blow up? You know, imagine like they're going to blow up, you know, the down the street here. We didn't have to deal with that in America, but it wasn't far-fetched to me because I'd been around the world and I'd seen the way that the reality is, you know, different. Obviously, everyone's reality is different, but reality is much more complex. Yes. And so, as you said, you know, JFK was in a way a red pill experience, but I don't know that I needed it because I was still grappling with what is reality. I hadn't formed a cohesive thing. As I think red pills for most people are when you have a certain idea that this is the way things work, and then boom, something happens to shock it out of you, right? Yes. It's like you trust, oh, the hospitals are safe, and then you take your parent there, and all of a sudden the hospitals are basically killing your parent or your friend or your child or whatever. And it's like, oh my gosh, this is not the world I thought it was. It's not the safe reality that I thought it was. It's much different.
I recently saw the film JFK again. I think it came out back in 1991. But the film is still, I was amazed by the fact that it still was so good. It's a really great film. And I think it had many nominations, and I think it got an Oscar. But it's a really good film, and for me it was really eye-opening that it is so different, the view that Jim Garrison had in contrast to what the mainstream narrative was. So what should be the biggest takeaway from this movie?
First, you tell me, what is your takeaway?
Well, for me, the biggest takeaway was that the mainstream narrative was not at all in congruency with what really happened. And the majority of the American people believed the mainstream narrative because the media was controlled by the people who created that narrative.
Yeah. Well, I've been exposed to media since I was born, and I think that's one of the most important things that I tend to have an understanding towards. I guess you could say like a knee-jerk response, and I think my dad even put it into, very much threaded that into the film Natural Born Killers for a reason, that the media's power over us. In the film, I say the media is like man-made weather, right? It's like they want to create a storm, they create a storm. They want to create, a fear or whatever, a wasteland, they create a wasteland. It's very interesting how media functions, and the power of it, the magic of it, the fact that people literally, first of all, we know it's hypnotic to watch something, especially on your in a darkened room, let's say, or on your TV screen, and it's like after a few minutes of watching anything, you kind of go into a slightly hypnotic state, right? You're receptive, you're learning, you're opening yourself to that experience. So it's very powerful. And what you realize with media so much is the power of it, that you personally, when you have ethics or morals, you're careful of what you say. And what shocks me is that a lot of people they don't have that morality, they don't have that ethics, they don't really care. They just get up there and they use it as a platform to kind of vomit or to express in many ways that are low frequency. Obviously, we know this, whether it's news, whether it's movies, TV shows, right? And there's oftentimes an agenda at work, because it goes through such a big process, to get to the level of being mainstream. There's thousands, at least not thousands, well, there's thousands of people that work on it, but there's dozens of eyes that have to look at it, if not hundreds of eyes that kind of have to oversee it, to make sure that before what you think as a creator in right maybe gets received by the mainstream,
yes,
there's a lot of interceptors, right? Yes. There's a lot of people that are going to tell you, you can't say that, that's not okay, you can't do there. What's shifted, as we know, what social media has offered is democratized it in a real way, that you and I can have this conversation and there's no intermediary. There's no producer that's going to cut us off because we're talking in a way that the mainstream channel won't allow, right? Yes. We've really opened up. We've created a new media, thankfully. Collectively, we've created a new media. And I think this is changing the ability to open up narratives, to open up consciousness and dialogue in a way that previously was not allowed, because it was so tightly guarded in a way.
Yes. I think your father, Oliver Stone, is a man that a bunch of people in Washington, D.C. don't necessarily like, because he's a truth seeker, and that is a problem. And I'm sure you had access to certain information at an early age, rather than, let's say, the traditional schooling. It seems that you were at a very young age very knowledgeable on many subjects. Can you elaborate a little bit on your childhood as a son of Oliver Stone and how that shaped you?
Well, it's hard to know, who else I would be if not for this, for this family, for my parents. But of course, we are shaped by our environment, by our parents, by our situations. I mean, I believe by our souls. Frankly, I believe our souls come into this world very much intentionally choosing the family, choosing the location for a reason, because each soul has a purpose here on this planet. Whether it's whether it seems big or small, that's just in the eyes of the moment, right? But for me, I would say that it's difficult to kind of boil it down, to what my father taught me or what my mother taught me. But I would say that they gave me the opportunity to, as I talked about earlier, have a very expansive awareness, be able to travel from a young age, to be exposed to many different cultures and perceptions, to think outside of the box just from the get-go, right? Whether it was writing reports in high school, at the same time, traveling to different lands, traveling with my dad to Asia, let's say, or to India and Tibet, and being exposed to his, he was very interested in Buddhism when I was growing up. So, that was was interesting for me is to learn, spiritual practices. And then likewise, he was always questioning the narrative, right? So he was interested in history, and I think he helped me have a love for history, which I carried into my college years. I studied American history at college and wrote my senior thesis on it. And so, there's many things that I could say that he helped to shape for me. Likewise, my mother, giving me like really just strong foundations, being good people fundamentally, being, flawed as any parent is. If you have good people who are good, good people, good humans as parents, they're going to give you a good foundation to grow from.
Yes. So you decided to study history at Princeton, but before you went to college, you already read the books of William Bloom. Can you talk a little bit on how that influenced you?
Yeah, the William Bloom's like Killing Hope, for example, was really it was eye-opening. So for example, Bloom, for those that don't know, was, I think, he came from the left. He was a very, you could say even hypercritical of American foreign policy. But essentially his work was like, it was meant to be like an encyclopedia of CIA and American involvement in foreign countries since the end of World War II, right? And under the banner of fighting communism, through the decades, we were involved in overthrowing governments, assassinating politicians or potential leaders, rigging elections, working working to destabilize economies. Also, John Perkins' book talks about that with his Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Very similar books in ways. So there was, I read Bloom when I was probably like 15, I think, and I remember I was traveling in Africa with my dad. We were in the Horn of Africa, I think, or was it the Horn? Or it was not the Horn. It was Kenya and Ethiopia, and at that time we were actually meeting with this American diplomat there, and I was reading Bloom's book, and I was looking at the Iraq War, the first one, from a different perspective, from the lens that, for example, those that don't remember, the U.S. kind of manipulated Iraq into a war because it was promoting Kuwait to slant drill into Iraq, right, for oil, and Iraq was pissed because they were basically taking their oil, and Iraq especially needed it at the time because Iraq had gotten into serious debt in the 80s with all the war against Iran. So essentially, the U.S. manipulates and supports Iraq to go to war against Iran, right? The U.S. and Israel and Saudi and all these countries, right? They all are involved in the Iraq war, and the U.S. is selling them weapons, right? Billions and billions of dollars of weaponry to go fight this bloody, bloody war with Iran. And then at the end of the war, America's like, okay, great, we sold you all those weapons, now you have to pay the debts. And at the same time, the oil economy was down, and then, Iraq was basically being slant drilled by Kuwait, and they were pissed because they couldn't pay these debts, and they were like, we're going to go get our oil. Basically, they told Kuwait to stop, and then America said, hey, we have no, their diplomat there said, hey, we don't have a position in your dispute with Kuwait. Okay, so Saddam says, okay, great. We just fought for you for the last 8 years against Iran. We'll go to Kuwait. And of course, the U.S. then says, you see, they essentially trapped them, right? You see, Saddam was so evil. And they made up these stories about, the Iraqis killing babies in the incubators, all this nonsense that they made up, and they sold it to the American people with the PR firms. So I was reading this kind of stuff, right? And I was debating. Then I was in the Horn of Africa with them. We met this American diplomat, and I was, kind of, talking to her about this, and she was like, "Oh, I haven't heard anybody supporting Saddam." I'm like, "Well, I don't think it's supporting. I think I'm just trying to give you a different perspective, right, than the American narrative, which has basically been we're going to go destroy, bomb the hell out of Iraq, defeat the army, and then at the end of it, sanction them to the place where, as we remember, in the 90s." They said about 500,000 Iraqi children died as a result of the sanctions. And the American Madeleine Albright, I think she was Secretary of State at the time, said, well, that's a price we're willing to pay. And I'm like, you guys are just so callous. You have no conception of humanity. This is what always bothered me about the Washington consensus, right? It was this detachment from reality. It was this idea that we can manipulate reality. I think that ultimately, one of the Bush guys, can't remember which neocon, said it best. He's like, we create reality. And you guys in the media or whatever, like, we basically feed you what we want. And then as you are not, and you're analyzing it, and you're saying, oh, we like it, we don't like it, this is good, this is bad. But by that point, we've already moved on. We've already recreated reality again.
Yes.
That's the mentality. That's the attitude.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about the agenda behind Hollywood. Hollywood is used for, we could say, social engineering, predictive programming, mind control, shape worldviews. And the word magic also comes up. And what is the agenda behind Hollywood? The original agenda, let's say.
You're saying, was it always about mind control, or was it?
Well, if you look at a lot of Hollywood films, let's say take a movie like Independence Day with Will Smith, the first one, right? Yeah. It's about an alien invasion, and because of the alien invasion, the whole world comes together. It looks like there is an idea or an agenda behind that. Some people say that there will be a fake alien invasion coming in the next 2 years. Look at what happened during the Mickey Willis calls it a pandemic. There are movies like Contagion with Matt Damon and Gwyneth Paltrow. I think the movie came out back in 2011. And exactly that script is what happened when the coronavirus came out. So
that was so there are examples like what you're talking about, like Contagion, for example. That has all the fingerprints of being like almost like a CIA preparation story. And it wouldn't necessarily be CIA. It can be done through, because remember, you look at the MK Ultra programs.
Yes.
MK Ultra, which CIA was running, which was mind control programs, mostly was outsourced to universities, hospitals, right, to doctors. It wasn't like just CIA guys that were doing mind control. They were outsourcing it to the prisons, right, to all these different private institutions, the Rockefeller Foundation. They were working with the private institutions. And so when something like a film, it's the same concept. I mean, you can work with a writer, a team of writers. It could be done through any number of these foundations or whatever, that they're saying, hey, we want to run a scenario, right? And we want to run a scenario for this, this outbreak of a deadly virus, and here's the hypothesis. And exactly the same as the pandemic. It was in Contagion, I think it was a bat, right, with a pig. It was like a bat pig kind of combo, right? And it comes from I don't remember. I think it was even in a wet market or something, but
exactly.
Maybe not a wet market. But right, it's like, and then it gets to this one American woman, and she becomes patient zero. And everyone's walking around with masks, right? And they're all like horrified of each other. They're all staying away because if you get this thing, there's like 1 in 4 or half of the 25 to 50% die. I mean, it was insane. It was like completely irrational as far as the actual scenario, but it put in place this idea that the only way to stop it was a vaccine, as you remember. The film literally was like, we cannot stop this thing except with the vaccination, and that was the search, right? And at one point they're trying to find. I can't remember how it played out, but like they were trying to find the origin, like the first monkey, right? Kind of like in the outbreak, right? They're trying to find the origin, and then eventually they give up on that, and then somehow they still get they solve it with the vaccine, and everyone gets vaccinated, and they're all good, and everyone can go back to life. It's the same story, right? Now that's clearly a propaganda piece. How it was run, I don't know all the details. I do know that the writer happens to be the producer of An Inconvenient Truth, which is very curious because that's also a propaganda piece about the global warming. I remember how everyone started really getting into global warming with that film. That was the landmark, foray from from Al Gore and the liberal establishment. Basically, look at how terrible humans are. We're going to kill the polar bears. The world is ending, and obviously it was exaggerated and a lot of things were incorrect, but it was great propaganda.
Yes.
So again, same producer, same writer as Contagion. Very curious. Find out who that guy is. But when you talk about Hollywood as a whole, as an engine of mythology, it goes back to the Old Testament. There's a reason. I mean, you think about it. There's a reason that when you study a little bit, like there's some great books about Israel's archaeology, right? Israel and Judea, thousands of years ago. And the archaeological record is nothing like the biblical record. And so there have been some good books written on it by archaeologists saying, look, this Old Testament that, the Torah is like a propaganda machine to sell the kingdom, whatever king they wanted to promote basically to the throne and the agenda, saying, hey, we are the chosen people for this land. And, we destroyed the city. It was like heroic stuff, right? Like we destroyed Jericho and all these cities, right? That, and it was like, he's like, you look at the archaeological record, it doesn't indicate that at all. Like the real history is probably not at all what the Old Testament is saying. But you have to create a mythology to promote Shakespeare is the same thing. The Shakespeare propaganda, whoever wrote Shakespeare is doing the same kind of operation, where they did an interesting movie recently called The Lost King about Richard III. And we all think of Richard III because of Shakespeare writing Richard III as this evil hunchback who murders his nephews and is basically a completely evil, villainous person, bloodthirsty. Well, the real history doesn't indicate that. The real history was, if I recall correctly, Richard III was the one who introduced the concept in law of you're innocent until proven guilty. He was a young king who comes from the same as the Richard the Lionheart. I'm blanking on which bloodline. I think it's Plantagenet, but essentially the Tudors had come into power under Shakespeare, right, with Henry VIII and Elizabeth, and so they wanted to do a propaganda piece that portrays the other bloodline, right, the other bloodline of English kings, and so Richard III was this pretender, and he was evil. And so it solidified the idea of the Tudors being the rightful monarchs of England.
Yes.
So, propaganda is not new to history. This is old. This is ancient history. Yes. That propaganda has been using books, using plays, using now, films or TV shows to generate narratives. Yes. So that people can get comfortable with the idea. And especially the main narrative that I like to poke at, which I did with my Hollywood DC documentary, is this idea of just like the American military being the good guys, right? And we saw obviously with the Vietnam War that narrative went by the wayside. Even when John Wayne was trying to do the Green Berets to, rally the American people to support the war, it wasn't working, right? But even, since the war on terror started, and even just before that, really, they started planting the seeds a little bit with like certain shows, certain concepts. But really, since the war on terror, it's been all like back to that whole rah, we are the good guys. And I think people are waking up to that. That's not necessarily the reality. The deep state, especially once that deep state concept came in, it became easier to say, hey, you know what, America is fundamentally good, yes, but there's a lot of bad actors.
Yes. So what they are doing, for instance, like a movie like Contagion, with so many big Hollywood actors, are they creating that film so when this is really quote unquote playing out in the real world, then it's more believable on a subconscious level? Why is that one of the reasons why they are doing it?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a lot of reasons for it. I don't think that every Hollywood actor is a CIA agent or, initiated to the secrets. I think some are, certainly. I think some are more aware of it. You have to have, sense of like people like George Clooney, like Matt Damon. I mean, they've been brought in to a different level, I think. They have to have this different awareness of what's going on. It's already indicated, like, Matt Damon doing the Bourne series, right? That's all about, programming of an assassin, right? And kind of a little bit of the mind control programming and this whole military industrial complex concept of like the perfect soldier. So, you're curious when you see someone like Matt Damon in it. How aware is he of the propaganda? But as far as the intention, to me, the intention is very much, they understand the spell, essentially it's like from a higher level of spell casting, of manipulation of reality. The engineers understand that once you plant a seed, people manifest that seed. Yeah. So if you want to create a dystopian reality, you have to keep planting the idea that that's the only future. if you want to, if you want people to feel uplifted, you got to plant the seeds of uplift, right? And I think this is where we're getting into an interesting confrontation between the consciousness of humanity that's awakening and the engineers that are still trying to basically sell people on a kind of an anti-human kind of woke agenda, and people are rejecting it. And I think this will continue, and this will potentially break the back of Hollywood, because if Hollywood wants to be ideological as opposed to responsive to where consciousness is going, it will not be able to stay in flow with the awakening of humanity.
Hey kanjers, op 23 maart dan is het zover. Marcel Messing komt naar Nederland toe voor een hele bijzondere lezing. Met onder andere ook Matthias de Smet. Alle tickets voor het event zijn uitverkocht. Maar wij van Univibes hebben een oplossing. Want wij gaan het live streamen. Wil je erbij aanwezig zijn? Ga dan snel naar onze website www.univibes.nl voor de tickets. Tot dan.
I think we are all, on the spiritual path. But in let's say, the spiritual world, there is sometimes a tendency to not do, let's say, the shadow work. A lot of people say, just focus on the light, don't focus on the bad things that are happening. But I think the more you, spiritually evolve, the more you will also see the shadow side. What's your take on that?
What's my take on which aspect? Why I'm more in the shadows?
There's a lot of people that don't want to, let's say some people don't want to see the quote-unquote negative or dark things that are happening.
I see. Yeah. I mean, it always starts with self.
Yeah.
Who's willing to look at themselves in a more honest way? Who's willing to look at their own dark side? And confront pain, right? I think there's an aspect of part of, you could say, again, going back to trauma, going back to conformity, the dark side is never comfortable in society, right? In society, it's like we don't want to focus on pain, on suffering, on loss. We want to, look, America as a whole, at least spiritually, is built on like winning, right? Who doesn't want to win? The story, who doesn't want to have, the positive? So the dark side oftentimes indicates an aspect maybe that's not pretty, that indicates loss and the sorrow that comes with loss. So again, going back to like who doesn't look at the dark side, I feel like some societies and many cultures are more open to looking at the dark side. Others are more aspirational in the sense of, hey, we got to be positive, and if we look at the dark side, it's going to derail us from the positive. So to be real is to look at both. To be real is to look at nature and to look at the way things are, and to understand that there is a night and there's a day, right? And to understand that there's life and there's death, and death is not the end. But if you don't have the spiritual awareness of that, then it's very traumatic. And I think America especially has been going through a lot of facing of death that maybe, culturally it hasn't wanted to do. It's like the bad guy dies. The hero's not supposed to die.
Yes.
And we've had that kind of ethos maybe for too long. So it's time for us to confront death. And that's 9/11 was about confronting death. We didn't do a good job of it. The pandemic was another confrontation of death. I think it's helped a lot of people in many ways to say, okay, let me have more gratitude for this world, and also understand that I may not be here tomorrow, and let me value the relationships I have. So I can't say, why people choose not to look at the dark side. I mean, it's like why do philosophers always have a skull? And if you look at a lot of the paintings and, you understand the past, right? They always had a skull on the desk. It was like, that was a reminder of mortality. But if you have a spiritual understanding, the physical end is not the true end, not the spiritual end.
Yes, yeah, you could see that when you look at all the near-death experiences that people have shared. I saw on your website that you have a course, and it's called Heart Magic, and I believe that's a spiritual course. But I want to talk about a series that you have developed, and it's called The Best Kept Secret, which is really a red pill journey. and you almost drag us into some dark stuff that's happening in the world. But it's also very eye-opening in many ways. And you created this with, I think, a former CIA officer who has passed, Robert David Steele. The series is a 6-step red pill. It's 6 steps, and it shows how we are controlled. It shows that there is a global elite, and you go into pedophilia and politics, and you look into the Franklin scandal, and that also foreshadows the Epstein story in many ways. And you also show how politicians are compromised, and you also talk about mind control, MK Ultra, and how it all became operational. And this red pill journey is really for anyone who wants to learn how the elite control our society. It seems to be a mixture of mind control, ritual abuse, transhumanism, which is, I believe, the ultimate agenda where they want to take us. So, the 6 steps. What are the 6 steps in your Best Kept Secret series?
You mean the 6 chapters?
Yeah.
Oh man, it's been so long since I made it. I'm trying to remember the names. So maybe it's fresher for you. Maybe it's fresher for you. But as I remember,
I will do it for you. Yeah. It's great.
Yeah,
the first step is, I think, one of the first things you try to elaborate on is how we are controlled. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? How are we controlled?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, the series is meant to show people how I consider the global, like the dark side of the elite, right? The dark side of the cabal, manipulating and influencing and controlling people. And so the different modalities of physical control starts with the psyche and starts with the mind. So in the series, we look at certain cases of actual mind control. The fact that I talked about earlier, there was actual CIA programs to physically mind control targeted individuals, be it for sexual purposes, to turn them into slaves or assassins, or just to use them in some capacity, right? There's that aspect. And then there's the greater aspect of mind control, which we talked about a little bit, which is media, right? Hypnotizing people through storytelling, through marketing and advertising, you name it, the whole collection of media that essentially is telling us what is acceptable ways of behaving, what is acceptable discourse, right? Even to the present day, challenging Sandy Hook narrative got Alex Jones sued for owing $1 billion, right? Alex Jones didn't kill anyone, but he questioned that narrative. He challenged the narrative. And as a result, it's like, that is not acceptable. So what they're doing is they're creating a type of mind control for people to say, if you think that this was a conspiracy, you're crazy. You're dangerous. You're tantamount to being a killer, a child killer. You see how this is a type of mind control because it's used for the mass population to scare people into obedience, right? To scare them into conformity, to scare them from questioning narratives, right? It's like, oh, if you question Sandy Hook, you must be, believe in the flat earth. Which is, it's like a faulty correlation, right? There's no correlation between the two. You can question one and not question the other, but that's what they do consistently. Plandemic, the documentary that was created by Mickey Willis, John Oliver went on and said, oh, people that believe in the conspiracy that COVID was created in a lab, that's like saying we never went to the moon and the earth is flat. Okay, maybe they're similar, but you can make one argument without making the other two have nothing to do with the first argument, but they like to conflate it. So all these are aspects of mind control. And that's the first basis for me of how we are controlled as a society. What is polite discourse? Where does the discourse end? What are you allowed to talk about? What are you allowed to express?
Beautiful. There is a global elite. Who are they?
They're ancient. I mean, I have different thoughts on the global elite. We can start with the aspect of who rules your reality, right? And there are different layers, obviously, to it. You can look at the political landscape and say, okay, in America, for example, we have a two-party system. The parties are pretty much, how do you say, they're difficult to infiltrate and to ascend within the party system, right? That's like a political class, but the political class, because they need money to run these parties, to basically to how do you say, the whole economy is connected intricately to politics. So the moneyed class, essentially, which is a very, and not just talking like rich people, I'm talking like the actual level of being able to manipulate markets. I mean, the kind of wealth that literally like a George Soros or a Warren Buffett or a Bill Gates has, right? They could literally be involved in manipulating markets if they wanted to, and maybe they do. Again, this connects to financial world, right? Of how credit is issued, how securities are created, the real wealth of nations, and then that again ties to then central banking. So there is a network of people that you can say have the ability to, the financial ability to literally create conspiracies and manipulate media, but it also starts ideologically, intellectually. That was part of my book, The New World Order, was to get at the intellectual idea of empire. You see that Henry Kissinger's mentor was someone who was groomed by the Round Table groups of England, and this idea of the British Empire being this great thing for the world, and we want to preserve the empire, but we don't want to call it an empire anymore because that's a dirty word. So we're going to call it a commonwealth, and then we're going to incorporate America and call it a new world order, and essentially bring all these countries of the world under increasing global controls through legal structures, through financial structures, right? Through organizations that are, like the World Health Organization or the World Bank and all these different treaties, then like the different GATS and other treaty organizations that essentially from the top down are influencing how societies are function and run. So there's an ideological perspective there that basically believes that there's like an elite class of globalists, right, that meet at Bilderberg or at Davos or with the Trilateral Commission. And they basically, they said it very clearly in 2016 when Trump won in 2016 and 17. They were saying, oh, Trump is a danger. He's a nationalist. He's all about America first. And no, we want the global order, right? We want to have all nations under our dominion. I mean, it already starts with the EU, right? I mean, the point of the EU is like bringing all the countries under more centralized control that's far away, as opposed to allowing people to run their own lives more locally, because that's what we can control effectively. We can most effectively influence our local reality, right? It's harder to influence things that are thousands of miles away. So I think that's really, to me, the ideology of this agenda. And then it co-opts people because you can see, I mean, it's a simple thing of grooming, right? I mean, you go through this university system, then you come out of university and you go to work for, whether you're in the publishing world, you're in the media world, you're in the banking world. I mean, you pretty much know people's psychology, right? And especially nowadays, it's much easier with Facebook and social media to know what they think. So you can groom people who gets to ascend into the corporate structure, into the high levels, the CEO positions, right? The COOs and CFOs and the boards. I mean, who gets to actually, or the chief editors, like who gets to actually go to that position of influence and power? It's very much a grooming process. So that's how I see the world being run. But do I know like who is the ultimate conspirator? No, I mean, it's again, a lot of this is ideological and financial. And a lot of the money, we know that the wealth of the world is very much concentrated in a few hands. I mean, the BlackRocks and the Vanguard and BlackRock are basically the same company, and they have huge amounts of financial power in terms of how much influence they have over every company that they're invested in. But they themselves are not alone; they represent very high net worth individuals, right? So, again, I'm not at that level of power. I can't tell you how this all works, but I look at it, and you start to recognize patterns and agendas, and you have to ask questions.
You also go into the Franklin scandal because it foreshadows the Epstein case. I don't want to go into the Franklin scandal, but I would like to go into the Epstein case. He was a big donor to the Democratic Party, and I think you can see here how politicians and also powerful people are being compromised. What is behind? What is the role of Epstein? What was his role? If he's, I mean, they say he's dead. Is he still alive? We don't know. But what was his role in all of this? He was a New York society figure. What was his role? What was he doing, Epstein?
Well, that's the mystery. I mean, there's a good book Whitney Webb wrote, The United States Under Blackmail, or One Nation Under Blackmail, it's called. And she goes into a lot of this. There's a long history of, you can look, I mean, again, looking at the evidence of politicians, businessmen, intelligence figures, you know, being entwined in this web where you can compromise politicians with sexual scandals, whether it was in the old days, it was homosexuality or, you know, maybe prostitutes. And then it became, you know, more clear it was children, not all the time, but I'm saying the children especially became a big blackmail tool if it's an underage girl or boy. And Epstein is someone that we just talked about, like connecting the financial world with the political world. It's someone like Epstein. I mean, he's supposedly a billionaire. I mean, he supposedly had hundreds of millions of dollars. He basically was groomed exactly by the financial elite. One of the Rothschild ladies, can't remember which one, you know, was like kind of a benefactor for him, made introductions to him. For him to other people in New York. Ghislaine Maxwell herself comes from the Robert Maxwell, who was a major publisher, had a huge scandal, was probably suicided as well because of his own connections to a mixture of, you know, intelligence and finance and basically, you know, he ended up drowning in a very mysterious way as well. So, you know, Epstein's network it's the high wealth and the high status. The head of Victoria's Secret, right, he basically was the power of attorney for this guy. I mean, that's a huge empire to have power of attorney over, and you have to be very close. So, you know, Epstein is a great person as far as connecting a lot of people, and again, the financial structures of, you know, where they're moving the money. It's all mysterious to outsiders. But again, with Epstein, he was also connected to the intelligence world. So at one level, he's maybe using blackmail, or, you know, maybe just tipping off the intelligence world of, hey, so and so is into this, so and so is into that, and you know, you get involved in all kinds of deals. And the book gets into that. One Nation Under Blackmail gets into some of the connections he may have had to, like, arms dealing and things like this. It doesn't surprise me because you're talking about a huge amount of money, political influence, and the girls, you know, that he's trafficking. That's just one aspect of his criminal activities, and his own sociopathic psychology is evident by how he's abusing and using these young girls. I mean, that's just indicative of his psychology, but his actual nefarious activity wasn't just sleeping with kids.
Yeah. So what was the purpose of the Epstein Island? Was it there to invite powerful people over so that they could make pictures of them in compromised situations with young girls, and in order to blackmail them? Was that the purpose of the island?
I have no idea. I mean, I think the best hypothesis is that the island was used for actual, maybe for blood rituals, probably more devious things that could be done than just sleeping with an underage girl, because that was being done in other places. Like Epstein was sleeping with teenagers in Miami, in West Palm Beach, right? He was bringing girls there that were, kids basically. And so why the island? I think the island, it's offshore. I mean, you could do much more nefarious things. And I've heard things about like underground tunnels and secret doors and things like this, and where are the witnesses? Let's
talk about David Icke. He wrote a lot of books, The Trap, The Biggest Secret. I saw in an interview that you read The Biggest Secret, and it's about the Anunnaki, the Sumerian tradition, the work of Sagaria Sitchin, the 12th planet. And when you read the book, you had a visceral soul thing. It touched you on a soul level. Why did it touch you on a soul level when you read The Biggest Secret?
because it made sense. There were some things in it that had deep resonance, as far as you said, when something touches you on a soul level, it's because you have a knowing that there's truth here. It's not to say that everything is, when you read something, like when you read something, it doesn't mean that every word is true. It just means that as a concept, it resonates. And so the idea of these ancient secret societies, we obviously know this is true, but the Anunnaki stories from the Sumerians, this resonated a lot, and led me to reading about Zecharia Sitchin's work, which again, I'm not saying is completely factual, but essentially there's deep truth to it.
Oh. Yes. So why do you feel there's deep truth to it? Do you just feel it, or is it like, okay, there is congruency with other things that I have studied or researched?
Well, because when I say essentially there's deep truth to it, it's like saying, knowing that a bunch of 10,000 or 100,000 slaves didn't build a pyramid. You just know. How do I prove it? I mean, how do you prove anything that's not right here in this moment? You have to either have a knowing or you don't. And this is where we are being trained not to trust our inner knowing and our intuition and our soul's knowledge. We are being trained to think only with the mind, which operates with probabilities and percentages. And we think we can recreate it. Maybe with a computer can recreate how the slaves built the pyramid. You can't tell me that that's how it happened.
Yes, it's okay. Let's talk a little bit about Donald Trump. David Icke says he is controlled opposition because you don't get into that kind of power without being part of the club. He's part of the deep state. I think you have another read on Trump. What is your read on Trump?
My read is that my biggest dispute with Icke is that Icke is too conspiratorial in a sense that that he thinks that everything is controlled by one essential group or one party, and that's not my understanding of how reality is. It's not one cabal, unified cabal running things. It's a very it's a collection of beings, and yes, there's an interdimensional aspect of it, and there is a reptilian nature to this race, at least one of them, but there's not the only race here. And there's other interests here, interdimensionally, right? Many other beings here. So when you get into, and also there's the truth of the reptilians that they want to evolve as well. It's not like they're just simply here there is a dark side to it, yes, and some of these beings that will never surrender their power and just want to feed on humans as long as they can until they're forced off. And then there's those that actually want to evolve and are evolving in conjunction with human consciousness and our evolution as a species. So it's very complicated. I don't like the reductionist idea, and even with humans, because with any being, it's like people are complicated. There's much more at work, and it's important to stay open and learn. So when I see someone like Trump, yes, was he allowed? Absolutely. I believe intuitively. I believe that when he went to Scotland before the election, it was like he was given permission. I think it was the Masons. I think it was a faction of Scottish Rite Masonry that gave the permission for him, and that's why he was allowed to win. But when it comes to the evolution in consciousness is going on simultaneous to these plans. That's why, I think a lot, if you look at, for example, the intention for the pandemic probably would have occurred sooner. A lot of these dark side cabal families hate Trump for a reason. They loved Hillary. They were so upset when Hillary lost. They had an agenda for a more rapid takeover, let's say like a New World Order kind of takeover under Hillary, that wasn't able to be implemented because there's a division between the families and the elite that want more of a nationalist approach, or maybe are more resonant with the actual destiny of America, and those that want to subsume America into a global order. So I see it very much as a conflict between factions. And again, these conflicts plays out in real time. So we are simultaneously shifting our consciousness, growing an awareness. And as we do so, all of a sudden their plans had to shift. And that's why when Biden came into office, if whatever is actually happening there, it became like a puppet show. And a lot of people after having gone through the pandemic were like, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense. This guy looks like a defective clone out here. What the heck is going on, right? So it's all playing out to me, not from a dark side controlling things, which is where I disagree with Ike. I think he's got a negative interpretation. I look at everything as positive. I look at everything as helping evolve our awareness and as a humanity by seeing the dark side, and now the dark side being exposed and exposing itself and playing its hands is actually the best thing for our awakening.
Okay. He also talks about, of course, Elon Musk. He says Elon Musk is a puppet of the let's say deep state, the administrators of the world, whatever you would like to call it, because he's getting billions of the American government, and there's a thing called free energy. So he must be a puppet. What do you think about Elon Musk?
I don't think he's a puppet fully. He's partly been co-opted, but actually he's been co-opted by positive forces lately. I think he started off probably more oriented towards maybe the dark side, and actually he kind of like Trump has shifted because I think they got a deeper understanding of what's going on. So I see Elon more in the nationalist faction at this point. He's concerned, like he said, he's concerned about the extinctionists. He's concerned about the censoring of freedom of speech. I mean, these are all, I'm sorry, like you can say someone's controlled opposition, but if they're fundamentally standing on the right thing, you have to say that's okay. I support that. If they shift and they go to the dark side, or they have a position that's completely wrong, we'll stand against that. But on these topics, he's right. So you have to take things in the evolution of consciousness, yes, not with the assumption that the entire plan, because fundamentally, again, I believe that the plan is God's plan. I really believe that we're in God's universe, which is moving towards the ascension of to the Aquarian age. We're already beginning the Aquarian age. Energy is becoming. We're becoming more attuned to energy. The energy of the whole planet is shifting. More light is coming in. Like there's a great positive to everything that's coming, and with the light, we see the darkness is a more extreme way, in a more clear way. So I'm not worried about figures like this. If Elon Musk turns out to be a villain, I mean, what's that going to hurt? Who is that going to hurt?
Yes. Well, let's talk about the light. You have a course. It's called Heart Magic. It's on your website. What is your intention with this course? What is your intention with it?
The intention with it is it's what the course is about. It's to bring more light and magic into your heart. I have a couple workshops that are on my website, as well as I offer one-on-one sessions with people. But the workshop uses a guided meditation. It uses some talks, and it also has prompts right in your journal so that you can reflect on some of these questions I ask. But to me, it was talked about energy. We have to become more attuned to energy. We have to become more sensitive to it, because that's the language of the universe. Is we as beings are not physical beings. We're energy beings. We have forgotten that. We are remembering it. Quantum physics was introduced 100 years ago for humans to actually have a scientific understanding for some of these concepts, because otherwise they would have said, oh, that's all like, Taoist stuff, and it does, it's all kind of like hypothetical. But no, actually, quantum physics is starting to prove what those in the spiritual side, or the Eastern traditions or the Gnostic traditions have always understood, which is the universe is not real. It's relative to your experience of consciousness, right? And it's all interwoven and all connected to you and your experience of consciousness.
So would it be the case then, if we would raise our consciousness, that all of this would go away? Let's say the dark stuff.
Not quite. It's not that the dark stuff would go away. We'd have a different understanding and appreciation of it. And that's kind of the way I see it. I don't know if I'm breaking up a little bit.
No, I can still hear you.
Okay.
After watching your Best Kept Secret series. So let's say after taking that red pill journey, how do we break out of this matrix?
Yeah. So just to go back to that whole thing about the dark side. The dark side would shift, right? As we shift consciousness, as we expand our consciousness and our awareness, would it be as extreme as it has been? I don't think so. I think there'll be less darkness. Right now, we've been in a world of too much darkness. Arguably we're in the midst of Kali Yuga or near the end of it. I'm not quite sure, but Kali Yuga is meaning like the most material, lowest place you can be in human evolution, right? So we've descended into this state of, not lowest place, but like the lowest state of materialism, right? Of fixation on materialism, of heaviness. We've allowed ourselves to descend here for education purposes, right? To see how extreme it can be, how bad it can be. And look, it's so bad that hundreds of millions of people were killed in the last century in wars that were oftentimes insane, right? Most of the time insane. Pointless, ideologically insane, driven by scarcity or fear or whatever, desires for power. But hundreds of millions of people were killed, sacrificed for these things. That's how bad things can get, right? We can get to the place of selling children to try to make ends meet, get to the place of raping and murdering children because people's psyches are so distorted. Their relationship to their selves is so warped. So this is where we are. As we expand consciousness, first of all, we have a greater sense of understanding and irony and place and context for all these things, saying, okay, wow, this is all a reflection of us. It's all a reflection of me. This is all within my nature. And then with rising awareness, we become more attuned to a reality where we want holistic business, for example. We want to do business with people that are more in alignment with us energetically, right? With intention, with ethics. We're no longer going to be in a world where we have to do business with Harvey Weinstein because he's got the money. We no longer have to go to the bank that's corrupt or that's perpetuating fraud and deception because we're going to have a different access to finance, right? We're no longer going to have to just take the terms of the Federal Reserve, the private bank, because that's the only creator of money. All these things are realities that have been fictionally created. They're not necessarily natural evolutions of what has to occur, but we allowed them and chose them into existence to see how bad, in a way, how corrupt the system can become, right? And obviously, you go down the list: corporations, politicians, environmental destruction. I mean, all these things, right? They're all aspects of a warped consciousness. So as consciousness expands, there will still be a dark side, I believe. There will always be a dark side. As long as we're in a 3D realm, there will be polarization, right? And everything in 3 is like 3, right? It's a triangle. So you have, you have day and night, and then everything that connects them in between. So that's the nature of the reality. There will be a dark side, but I don't think it has to be as dark, ignorant, stupid as what we've seen these last few thousand years.
Okay, Sean, thank you so much. It was really a privilege to talk with you, and keep up the good work. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.